And I'm joined live from London in England by Tom Burke, who's a bioenvironmentalist, and from Glasgow by Bob Ward, who's a Policy and Communications Director at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at the London School of Economics. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us today here on The Edge. We're coming towards the end of the COP26 summit in Glasgow, Scotland. Tom, can I start with you? Looking from London, how do you see that the climate summit has gone? Has it been a success, or has, as some people have suggested, it's tended towards being just another summit that hasn't led anywhere?
I think it would be quite wrong to say that it's another summit that hasn't led anywhere. It has actually led somewhere. It's not led us to where we need to be. That's a different point. I think that the ministerial segment at the first gave quite a lot of political impetus to the discussions on all the different details of how we're going to do things that are taking place, still taking place as we speak. So we don't know exactly where it's going to end up. But I think it's going to end up in a better place than I thought it would at the beginning of the exercise. It's still going to be a long way short of what we need to do to stay below 2, well below 2, and indeed to meet that goal of keeping 1.5 alive. So there's a lot more to do, but there is now some momentum. I think the significant development is that for the first time we've seen governments really being much more serious about the problem, if not yet the solutions, than we've ever seen them before. And I think that's a positive to take out of it. But a long way to go.
Absolutely. Now, Bob, it looks like you have a COP26 lanyard around your neck at the moment. I think for the last week you've been in Glasgow. What is the mood there, and what's your take from how things have gone?
So I've been here for the full 2 weeks, and we're in the last hours now, we hope. There was some a new draft final decision published this morning. Countries have been discussing it. We're not quite yet there in terms of agreement. There's still some major areas that need to be clarified. The mood here has been relatively positive. As Tom mentioned, we had some major announcements last week, and we had world leaders here giving real positive momentum to the process. But we're now in the stage where people are arguing over the exact language of the final decision, and those always become very much more difficult because you've got to reach consensus between 196 countries, and that would be difficult on any issue, let alone climate change. But I think we are now closer to the overall temperature goals of the Paris Agreement, which, remember, committed all countries to limiting the warming to well below 2 degrees. We're not quite yet there, but the pledges we've had leading up to COP26 and here indeed have got us closer to 2 degrees. And that's the closest we've been yet, but we've still got more work to do, as Tom mentioned.
Right. Well, 2 degrees sounds very small, but these numbers, the year 2050, the year 2100, 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees. What are the figures or the dates that we really need to hold on to, Tom?
The dates that we need to hold on to, the absolute core date is we have to decarbonize our economy, i.e. stop burning fossil fuels by 2050, by the middle of the century. That's absolutely both the key goal and the key date. If we do that, we've got some chance of being able to avoid the worst effects of climate change. One of the things I think has become very clear from this conference, and clear to the politicians in particular, is this is not a future problem. This is a problem which is already doing damage to people all over the world right now. And all that can happen if we don't accelerate the rate at which we try to solve the problem is that it will get worse and go on getting worse and go on affecting more and more people's lives immediately.
Absolutely. And let me just carry on and ask you a follow-up to that. Is it in that solely in the hands of the politicians, or is it the role of the people as well?
Well, actually, it's a combination of people, certainly, and it's quite clear to me that the public all over the world has now experienced and had experiences that validate in the public mind the science. Governments must do their piece to create a framework that people can have confidence in, that's going to develop going forward and going to do more and more. But one of the really interesting things that come out of the COP is the way in which the private finance community in particular has got the message that climate change is really bad for investment. And therefore what we're seeing, the mobilization of private financial firepower enormously being driven actually by those institutions themselves. If we can match that with an increase in the firepower provided by the public institutions like the multilateral development banks, the IMF and so on, that the governments control, then I think we're going to really drive forward the investment that is actually what is central to achieving the goal we've got.
So Bob, we can't just leave it in the hands of the politicians. The private sector needs to be involved as well. At COP26, has there been a balance of input from both governments and private companies and maybe private individuals?
Well, this negotiation process is between governments. Right. They are the parties that are negotiating here. The private sector can come and influence the decision making. As Tom said, it's been very positive here. And I think you could honestly say that this is the first one of these events where the private sector has been out in front of governments, has been urging governments on to do more. A lot of companies are saying, look, we are now ready to invest. We can see business opportunities here in changing our energy system, in building new renewable systems, in investing in the development of electric vehicles. But we need governments to do their fair share of producing policies that are all consistent and strongly oriented in that right direction. And only then will companies feel that they can invest with confidence. And that's what we need in both poor and rich countries around the world now.
So does it come down to a question of leadership? You know, who is leading this? Rather than, it's easy for people to say, yes, well, it would be great to do this, but he's not doing it, so why should I start? Is this really what it comes down to? You're nodding away there, Tom. Can you respond?
Yeah, I do think that this really is a very important component of this, as far as individuals are concerned, are exactly those political leaders, to construct the narratives that bind people together and get people working together. Now, one of the things we've seen all over the world that doesn't get into the headlines, doesn't get reported very often, is enormous response from communities and families as people have tried to do their bit. And actually, one of the things I think was missing from your earlier infographic, the single most significant thing that every individual can do is to, where it's possible for them, is to vote for candidates who will do more on the climate, irrespective of what party they belong. Find a candidate and vote, because that's the signal that will let political leaders know they have to play a more important part.
So people need to tell their politicians where they want to go. Bob, taking up on this, this is really something that has to then happen at a very local level, isn't it? That even the local council and on the high streets, people have to be pushing forward.
Well, it needs to happen at all levels, and what people want to see is action at all levels here. I mean, Tom mentioned that you have to vote for governments that are taking action. But what is very different now is most people can now see all around them locally the impacts of climate change. They're here, they're on people's doorsteps. It's made it much more real. It used to feel, I think, to a lot of people, a distant, remote threat, something that was happening in the future in other countries. Now it's here. We've seen all around the world particularly this year, extreme weather events that are being influenced by climate change being made more intense, more frequent. And people have understood that this is an urgent situation that now requires urgent and strong action at all levels, not just by governments, not just by companies, but by communities and individuals as well.
Now, I just want to carry on with you just for a moment, Bob. As you're in Glasgow, obviously when you've been outside of the conference facilities around the city, you've seen many people who've come to protest or to make a statement. What sort of people have they been, and what has impacted you most about what we've seen in any protests?
Well, the people who are marching and protesting are people from all walks of life and all backgrounds, young and old. It's not just an obsession of environmentalists, it's ordinary people, particularly parents and grandparents who are worried about the kind of world they're going to leave to their grandchildren and children. But the most powerful people here on the streets have been the young people themselves. I mean, they have just been an incredibly powerful voice saying, look, it's our lives. We're going to live with the consequences of your decisions now for much longer. You have to work harder so that we have a future that we can rely on, that we have lives and livelihoods that we can look forward to that are going to be at least as good, and we have opportunities at least as good as today's adult generations. And I think they've given a special energy and have reminded policymakers of the urgency and of what's at stake. What's at stake is the future for our children, our grandchildren, and future generations.
Indeed. I mean, with the threat to humankind, it's literally a fight for life into the future. Tom, so there have been some agreements working to end and reverse deforestation. US and China say that they'll work together, and others saying that they'll move away from coal. It's easy to give words. We've seen since these climate conferences have started that the temperature has continued to rise. Now, no doubt it will continue to rise for a few years to come, but do you genuinely have hope that with the spirit that's been engendered at this particular conference, that we could begin to see a change towards creating hope for the future?
I do have a sense of hope, which I wasn't expecting. Actually, part of that hasn't been so much what's in those decisions and the kind of agreements you announced. It's just to be part of, as you go around the conference center, there are 30 or 40,000 people from all over the world having a conversation about a problem we share. And I find that enormously inspiring and hopeful, given the fact that there is a global conversation going on. And that tends to get a bit overlooked by people who somehow think these conferences are all a bit of a waste of time. But yes, I do think that the big question that's coming forward now, and I think we'll see really some important clues on in the next 24 hours, is whether governments are going to agree that we need to maintain the integrity of those pledges by making sure that we can track what each other are doing and make sure that we have confidence that when people say they'll do something, they will actually do it. And I think and there's still a debate going on about how to do that. But if they manage to reach an agreement on what's called, if you like, the integrity of the process going forward, it will be another reason for hope.
Well, and it will be a great achievement for humankind to actually come to an agreement and take things forward. Gentlemen, that's all we've time for today. I want to thank you so much for joining us and for bringing, and especially for Bob bringing us a special flavour from Glasgow, from COP26. We feel that we too have been part of the conversation here on The Edge. Thank you.